Weebs are hyped for Chainsaw Man. The anime community was blown away by the trailers, and they are very excited for this series to start. But not as much as the manga readers are. Manga readers know that Chainsaw Man is a masterpiece, and it has only begun to flex how awesome it is. I can confidently say that Chainsaw Man is the new standard for shonen action manga. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly ask you to like and subscribe. I've been very happy with the growth this channel has had so far, and I'm excited to see where we're going. If you're looking for ways to support the channel directly, you can head on over to patreon.com/Danon. There are several tiers to choose from. You can pick an anime or manga for me to do a video about, or you can join our monthly manga club. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. A masterpiece is a work done with extraordinary skill, usually an extreme intellectual or artistic achievement. That achievement then influences future works, other creations by other artists. But in the olden days, craftsmen would present a piece of work to a medieval guild as evidence for their qualifications to attain the rank of master. That is to say, it was not public acknowledgement that made one a master, it was the approval of other craftsmen. So I, as someone who is not a mangaka, nor an anime producer, cannot judge a work and say, this is a masterpiece. That has to be done by others in the manga community. After reading Volume 1 of Chainsaw Man, the head of MAPPA immediately started negotiations to create the anime. Let me repeat that. The head of one of the biggest and best animation studios in the world read the first 7 chapters of a long-form shonen manga and decided that he absolutely needed to make it into an anime. The first volume was released March of 2019, so over 3 years ago. That's how long the anime has been in production. And it looks gorgeous. Every bit a worthy rendition of this series. As I stated earlier, masterpieces have an influence on future work. Now, while we can't predict what works will be influenced by Chainsaw Man, we can take a look at past masterpieces and discuss how they influenced their respective genres. A bit of backstory, if you'll permit me. My wife loves film. She loves classics, modern films, historical dramas, and good anime. She used the AFI's top 100 films of the last 100 years as a checklist. So when I wanted to ask someone for a list of masterpieces that had the most influence on the film industry, not just how movies were made, but the business surrounding them, of course I went to her. Now, this list is not in order of least influential to most, that's entirely subjective. Instead, I'm listing them in the order the films were released. I could make a 20-minute video on each of these films and their influences, but nobody's got time for that. We've got Chainsaw Man to get to. To start, we have Intolerance, which was a silent film released in 1916, and it was the first ever epic. This 3.5-hour film covers 4 different stories and time periods, showing love and hate throughout the history of humanity. Students of film should watch this classic, as they will appreciate it, because without it, the epic wouldn't be what it is today. In fact, it might not exist at all. Next up, we have 1940's The Great Dictator. Not only was this Charlie Chaplin's first speaking role, forever ending his long-running character, the Tramp, it also showed how an actor who dominated the box office in silent film could still find work in these new talkies. People talk about how big of an impact computer-generated special effects had on film, especially in the 90s, but nothing from the 90s had as big of an impact on film as actors being able to speak. Additionally, for the first time, an actor was driven out of the United States for his political views. Charlie Chaplin's movie painted Hitler in a negative light, and many Americans in the early 1940s liked Hitler. Yes, you heard that correctly. Only 1 year later, one of the greatest films of all time was released. Citizen Kane was the magnum opus of genius filmmaker Orson Welles. Whether or not you like the film or understand what rosebud means, Citizen Kane was the first movie to ever use unusual camera angles, as well as shadows in film. Prior to Citizen Kane, shadows were avoided, but Welles saw them as a tool and used them to help weave his fantastical tale, told from an unreliable narrator about an unstable mad genius. 30 years later, another film was released that many consider to be the greatest of all time. The Godfather was a true masterpiece and changed the way storytelling was done forever. This is a 3-hour film where 90% of the time, nothing much is happening on screen. There's barely any dialogue. But despite that, The Godfather is riveting and you can't help but keep watching. This is storytelling through film as it is meant to be. And for the last 50 years, people have tried to imitate it, but failed every time. Finally, a mere 5 years after Coppola released The Godfather, a small, low-budget science fiction movie that no one took seriously exploded and changed not just film, but America forever. It is hard to understate the influence Star Wars has had on America, but the multi-generational effect on pop culture it has had cannot be denied. The film was one of the most profitable of all time, both in terms of box office and merchandising. You think the MCU has dominated pop culture over the last decade? The Avengers doesn't come close to the influence Star Wars has. In fact, the MCU wouldn't exist if Star Wars hadn't already proven that geek films could be successful. Now, not all influential films are masterpieces, but masterpieces are always influential. And each of the aforementioned films heavily influenced both the film industry and pop culture in general. But what about anime? Because that's what we're talking about. Yes, anime has had its influence on Western film. The Akira slide is so iconic that people forget how long it's been going on. But the rest of Akira also heavily influenced Japan, and even media outside of Japan. A lot of 90s anime was cyberpunk, with action scenes and technology reminiscent of Akira. Another anime from the same time period that massively influenced future anime was Sailor Moon. Though it didn't invent the magical girl genre, it reinvigorated it and perfected it. It also was the anime that caused the biggest impact in America. Prior to Sailor Moon, there were a few anime fans, but they were mostly boys. Sailor Moon brought in millions of new fans to the medium, most of them girls. In fact, the reason you can find manga in bookstores is because of Sailor Moon. But Sailor Moon is a shoujo, while Chainsaw Man is a shonen. And shonen wouldn't be where it is today without Dragon Ball. Each of the big three drew heavily upon the influence of Akira Toriyama's seminal work. All three series have main characters who power up and transform, all of them have story arcs that are completed with a fight, and all of them have enemies who wind up as allies. Additionally, the standard Monster of the Week formula that old shonen shows relied on was thrown out, replaced by dangerous villains whose powers far outstripped those of our heroes. Whether you love or hate Dragon Ball, there's no denying the impact it had on shonen and anime in general. Of course, no list of influential masterpiece anime would be complete without Neon Genesis Evangelion. It is impossible to overstate the influence this anime has had on Japan. Think about how much cultural relevance Star Wars has had in the United States. That's how big Eva is in Japan. Prior to Eva, if a character on an anime had a mental disorder, chances are they were a villain, or someone to be pitied. Eva showed that characters could be afflicted by mental illness and still be heroes. But even beyond Eva, the series that probably had the biggest impact on Chainsaw Man was Attack on Titan. Not because of story structure or that they share a similar level of grotesque violence, but because Shueisha allowed Attack on Titan to slip through their fingers. The creators of Shonen Jump decided that Attack on Titan was too violent for their young readers. But then they saw its meteoric rise in popularity and watched as Kodansha made millions. All told, the manga has sold over 110 million copies in print worldwide. So when Tatsuki Fujimoto came in and pitched a hyper-violent manga about a man who has chainsaws coming out of his everywhere, they jumped at the idea. Now, as I stated before, Chainsaw Man is a masterpiece. We've gone over examples of masterpieces and even shown that people who know manga and anime, the Hadamappa and the editors at Shonen Jump, consider Chainsaw Man to be one of the best currently running manga in existence. Shonen Jump picks bangers. Of the top-selling manga from the last decade, 7 of them are owned by Shueisha. And it would have been 8 if they'd decided to pick up Attack on Titan. But what does it take to be a masterpiece? Let's take a look at elements of a story and some examples of what not to do. With all art forms, there are rules that you must follow, at least at first. Whether you are cooking, painting, composing music, filming a movie, or writing a manga, there are rules that must be followed. A beginner learns these rules and why they are important. A journeyman knows the rules by heart. A master knows when to ignore the rules or break them completely. One of the rules of storytelling is story structure, and how it should follow a rising action. What does this mean? There are several elements to writing a story. Character, setting, tone, conflict, plot, and even though conflict is the single most important element, because without conflict there is no story, one that isn't often discussed and is often overlooked is pacing. Quick rant about Death Note. Death Note is the worst anime I've ever finished. I've watched worse anime, but usually drop them, often before I finish the first episode. Time is the only non-renewable resource, and I don't have the time for an anime that doesn't spark joy. But I actually finished Death Note and still regret it to this day. I have very few positive things to say about that anime, but I will find a use for it as a lesson on what bad story structure looks like. Rising action is one of the essential structural elements to any story. Right after the opening, we get some breadcrumbs that start to lay out the plot. We start to see where the story is headed. It's not necessarily foreshadowing, but it creates dramatic tension while building towards the climax. Remember, a story isn't a story without conflict, and rising action is the building towards or building up of that conflict. That's what a climax is, the conclusion of the conflict. I'm not just talking about action here, this goes for romance series as well. Death Note committed the cardinal sin of having the climax, the single most exciting moment in the series, in the first episode. First episodes are meant to be hype. They're meant to make us want to tune in next week or continue binge watching. The first 5 seconds of a YouTube video are the most important. They're the hook that keep you engaged. But your show has to stay entertaining. You have to build on what you've created. Not every episode has to be a banger, but they do each need to build one upon the other. The stakes get higher and higher until the dramatic finale. So in most stories, no matter how amazing the opening is, the ending is that much more awesome. Which is why I hate Death Note. Because despite having one of the best first episodes in anime history, the rest of the show goes downhill. So why did I bring up Death Note? Anytime I encounter a new story that has an amazing opening, I'm always nervous and reminded of that disaster. Yes, it is important for shonen openings to draw in new readers and set proper expectations. The same can be said of any genre, but it is especially true of shonen. The first chapter of Chainsaw Man is insane. We've got over-the-top action. The chapter does a great job of establishing both the premise and the characters. It introduces the world and shows you something grotesque and beautiful. But unlike Death Note, Chainsaw Man builds upon that opening. It continues to build the hype, higher and higher. Each arc is more powerful, more insane, more violent than the last. The stakes are higher. We care about the characters more because we've gotten to know them, and we don't want to see them go. The violence is more epic, the villains are scarier. And the best part? Chainsaw Man has only finished its opening act. In only 97 chapters, Tatsuki Fujimoto has created a masterpiece to rival any of the great shonen series. And it's only the beginning. But not only is this series a masterful example of shonen, able to stand alongside the likes of Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball, Demon Slayer, and One Piece, it's also fun, which is rare. I've been debating on how to do a video on this topic for a while, good versus fun. How do you quantify good? How do you explain fun? I think it's best to use examples. Fairy Tail is my go-to example for an anime that is bad, but fun. Overall, Fairy Tail is a 4 out of 10 anime. The animation quality is hit or miss, the characters are all one-dimensional, the storytelling and conflicts are all pretty basic. But it's still one of my favorite anime. Because it's fun. Not every movie needs to be The Godfather, and not every anime needs to be A Silent Voice. A Silent Voice is the best anime film I've ever seen. Yes, better than Miyazaki's work, better than Your Name. It is a masterful piece of storytelling and yanks your heart out only to bring you back to life in tears. Your Name is cute, and you can watch it over and over again. It's a fun anime movie, just like how Fairy Tail is a fun anime series. But just because something is fun doesn't make it good. Generally, I prefer fun over good. But movies and anime that can capture both? Those are the greatest of all time. One Piece, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Kaguya-sama Love is War, Great Teacher Onizuka, Baccano, Konosuba, Mob Psycho, Cowboy Bebop, Bunny Girl Senpai? Be prepared, because Chainsaw Man will be on that level. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, a huge shout out to my editor Cute Stuff. I couldn't make these videos without her. If you'd like to hire her to edit your own videos, there's a link to her Fiverr page below. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons: Jiraiya, Waffles, Muffins, Casey, Danny, Nick, Marcus, Black Dragon, and Phoenix of Ice. You guys are awesome. I post new anime or manga videos every Monday, or you can click here to watch additional videos. Also, I moved all of my Commander content over to a new channel, Commander by Damon. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next time on Musings by Damon.